Hi everyone. Sorry I look a bit of a mess today. It is very humid today and my hair is very much reacting to it and I can't seem to stop spinning in the chair. So sorry about that if that starts to annoy you. But today I'm going to be doing a video about altars, specifically deity altars. Now I'm doing specifically deity altars because of the fact that I find that whenever I go over social media, YouTube, whatever you watch the videos on or read about, it is always talking about working altars. And if you want to even see a deity altar, you have to specifically research that deity. So today I'm going to be doing like a 101 on deity altars specifically. And we'll just get straight into it. So I'm going to talk more about sort of the altar itself, like the placement, the physical altar, and then offerings on the altar. Now, of warning, obviously, every entity and every deity's altar is going to look different, even if you put 10 people in a room that work with the same deity. I need to stop talking so fast. All of their altars are going to look different. Taking into account specifically UPG or unverified personal associations with your entity that you tend to gather over time, or if you're like me and you can just say their name and a bunch of stuff pops in your head. So they do tend to look different from person to person. Do take that into account, and obviously every entity and deity is different. Also taking into account that the pantheons that we've put deities in are created by us. They don't exist amongst the physical realm, meaning they're not sort of tied down by our beliefs. They do all associate with each other, which will tie into a point I'll make later. So first off, the first point I'm going to make here is about the physical altar itself. They take up so much space. I kid you not. It doesn't matter how small they look by themselves, you put them within the rest of your room, they take up so much space. It is ridiculous. And then if you put them all together, it takes up like 3 entire massive furniture pieces worth of surface area. It's one of the reasons I have them all in one spot. They're in that wardrobe back there, this one that you're looking at. But they take so much room. It is... No one talks about it, and it honestly makes me so mad because it is so annoying to me. But anyway, I also need to talk about the fact that different entities and different deities have different preferences, obviously in offerings, but also in the altar itself, what the altar is made out of and where the altar is placed and who it's placed next to if you have 2 deity altars next to each other. So, for example, like I said, I have almost all my altars in that back cupboard there, but I do have one of them still out, and that is Lord Crononos, because he refuses to not be where the plants are, and I can't put a plant in my wardrobe. So, he's there. Similarly, a lot of deities and entities that you work with for beauty and glamour will demand to be put where all of your makeup or jewelry is, or even your clothes. And going off of that, different entities will have preferences on who you place them near, if you place them near another entity. So an obvious example of this would be Artemis and Apollo tend to always go next to each other, right? Similarly, if you had Hermes show up, he'd probably be next to them as well. Like marriages, Hades and Persephone. Also the fact that all of the options that I just gave you there, 90% of the time when you work with one, the other one shows up at one point, but they prefer to be next to each other. Similarly, angels would probably prefer to be next to other angels, but they rarely complain. An example though of entities that aren't even within pantheons, actually within the same pantheon, that don't tend to like each other is Lord Loki and Archangel Michael. I haven't even set up Loki's altar, but all I know is that every time I think about it, I hear a voice in my head going, it's not allowed to be next to Archangel Michael's. No, no, no. I've heard other people that work with the both of them, and apparently they do not get along at all. Loki likes antagonizing a lot of the angels, from what I hear. so I probably wouldn't put him next to any angel in general. Unironically, I should say. Similarly, Loki tends to like a lot of the demons. Specifically, I've heard that Loki actually is good friends with Lord Lucifer. Not that I would know personally, I don't work with any demons as of the moment. But my point is that each entity will have their own preference, and it likely will not be bound by the rules that we've put in place for our religions and the pantheons that we've placed them in. So, actually, one more point about the altar itself. Fair warning, they rarely are aesthetically pleasing, and if they are, they rarely match whatever room you've had them in. Right? Sometimes you can, if you have like a whole place, you can find a room that they might match. Or if you have a whole place and all that, you might have entities that do not care and will demand certain rooms of the house. So Hestia may demand to be on top of a fireplace, or Hestia may demand to be in the kitchen because of just what she has domain over. Similarly, if you have like a large walk-in wardrobe, Aphrodite may demand to be in there. Or if you have a music room, Apollo may demand to be in that room. I keep using Greek deities. Sorry. But they are rarely aesthetically pleasing, and they rarely match the room you've put them in. Some entities will make their altars or demand their altars be pleasing, but they rarely care. So I feel like the best example I have of this is angels. They don't ask for a lot of physical offerings as it is. They just do not care. Like, they don't really understand the concept of making things look very aesthetically pleasing in rooms and stuff. They have very different priorities. Similarly, on the other hand of that spectrum, you have Lord Loki, who refuses to let you organize his altar. You are not allowed to make it look aesthetically pleasing. It has to be as chaotic as possible, and if you do something, he will make you break your toe. Alright? So, just fair warning. In terms of offerings, so obviously each entity and each deity is going to have preferences, but the general stuff that tends to go on altars is, well, the most common one is a candle. Now, I don't use candles because I'm sort of scared of the certain entities that I have with candles. Right, like I said, I have 2 angels that I work with, and in the past few months, I've felt extremely drawn to work with so many more of them, which was not planned. But angels are made out of holy fire, meaning that they tend to very much like candles. And the idea of putting a bunch of siblings next to each other with a bunch of fire sounds dangerous. Incredibly for my house. Similarly, I probably wouldn't give Loki a candle unless I moved everything that he had into like the middle of a very large clean surface. Right? He would probably burn someone down. But generally, you use candles as they're used as sort of a way for the entity to communicate through. So, for example, my spirit guides have a very large candle, and just last night, the candle was going crazy. It had a really small wick, so I was actually expecting it to not really burn a ton, but it was massive. And then when I tried to blow it out, they would not let me until I did some tarot cards to see what they wanted. And when I say they would not let me, I'm telling you, I sat there for 2 minutes just blowing on the candle, like trying to get the wick to blow out, and it would not go out. That's what I mean. Food offerings is another one. Food and water sort of go in the same category, but water tends to be more important. You sort of always have it on there as just more of a respect thing. But in terms of the food, a lot of the times it may be a little bit longer before you give them an offering, because especially for entities that don't have a lot of information, you may not know what they want. But yeah, so water, food offerings, and then I personally, this isn't really the norm from what I've seen, but I specifically give them jewelry pieces. And I do this as a way to do sort of honoring offerings instead of physical offerings. I wear it as an honor to them. And literally every entity I think I have has a jewelry piece on their altar. I give them a crystal, usually one that's either associated with the deity itself or what I'm working with them on. So, for example, if I had one, I would give Artemis a moonstone, and then with Lord, I was supposed to say Lord Michael, that is not the word, Archangel Michael, I give him a ton of obsidian because I ask him for protection, and it makes sense, you give him all the obsidian. And then you almost always have, but this tends to come a little bit later, a piece of imagery, if that makes sense. So whether it's a statue of the entity itself, an artwork, something, I actually find, I've thought about it recently, that it doesn't actually need to be a statue of the entity itself. It could be a statue of an animal they're associated with. So a good example of this, and I actually think he would prefer it, if I'm being entirely honest, Lord Crononos up there, where all my plants are, I honestly believe he would prefer an animal statue to a person statue of himself. Similarly, I don't think Lady Artemis would complain about having a deer statue as her imagery. You get what I mean? And then you tend to put, this isn't necessary, but you tend to find over time that not a single entity or deity doesn't like plants. All right, they will take the plant. They will almost never complain. They want the plant, okay? That leads into my next point about offerings, is that the offerings do not need to be on the altar. So at first, for like a day or two, you might put them on the altar so that the entity knows it's theirs. But like I said, most of my altars are in that wardrobe, so it's pitch black, right? The majority of the time. I'm not gonna leave it open all day. So the plants, and a lot of my entities have plants tied to them, are out here. This belongs to my spirit guides, but it's right here on my desk, and my spirit guides are in that wardrobe, right? So that's just a good example of the fact that they don't necessarily need to be on the altar. So if you have like a large offering to them, so like a probably good example of this is that if you have Lord Loki, right? Lord Loki. If you have like a box of plushies that you have, you could give them as an offering to Lord Loki, but they may not fit on his altar for obvious reasons. Or if you work with your ancestors, you may put your sentimental box as an offering to them, etc., etc. So they don't necessarily need to be on the altar. Another good offering I should put out here though, you'll learn over time that if you have an entity, and you will at one point, that works with you on shadow work, because most of your entities will force you to do it, a good thing that you could give them is your shadow work journal, if you have one. Or if you work with an entity on witchcraft, you can actually give them your like grimoire or book of shadows, whatever you call it. Moving on to my next point. If you ask for, so if you give them offerings and you ask for something, I tend to personally, I write down, like I communicate through writing a lot more, because I can actually feel their presence, and I feel like I'm awkwardly communicating with someone who, like, I feel like I don't deserve to be communicating with, because that's my own insecurities. But because of that, I tend to write it down. Now, if you do the same thing, if you write down this sort of communication, you may find that generally it's fine to just place the piece of paper on the altar, maybe under something, but you also may find that certain entities respond way better to it if you actually put them in an element. So if you get a little bowl of dirt and you bury it in the dirt, or a lot of Celtic deities, because this is actually what they used to do, is they used to submerge the offerings into water. So, or like literally yeet it into the river, because that's how Celtic deities worked. They were generally amongst the land. So if you work with a Celtic deity, you may find that they prefer to have the letter emerge into water, or any entity that is associated with water. On the complete other side of the spectrum, if you work with either angels or even Greek deities, you may find that they prefer that letter to be burnt as a way to communicate with them. They probably will still read it if you don't, but it's more of like you put in more effort for it. So I just want to put that out there. It's not really necessarily an offering, but I just wanted to talk about it. Also, fair warning, I work with angels, and I feel like they tend to be way off from humans even more so than deities are. So something that you may learn along the way is that some of the offerings that these entities and deities ask of you could seem super random to us humans. So, for example, I have sugary drinks in my house, and as you learn about angels, you find out pretty quickly that the only real consensus about them is that they all like sweet stuff. So anything with high sugar in it. And you'd think I have sugary drinks in my house, they'd ask just for a sugary drink, but no. Both Archangel Jophiel and Archangel Michael ask for just a bowl of water, but then for me to put teaspoons of sugar into the water. Nothing else, just water and sugar. That would taste disgusting as a human, but it's almost like they combine two offerings. Like I would usually just give them a jar of sugar and then a bowl of water, but they're like, no, combine them. And also, angels have a tendency, like, angels don't really need sustenance, so they don't need to eat and they don't need to drink. So this is probably why they do it with me, but I give them the sugar water. And then if I have a flower that I like, instead of me putting it in a vase, they just tell me to put it into their drinking bowl. It is very strange to me, but to them, it's like, and there are probably other deities out there that do the exact same thing, where it's just a random word pops up into your head and you're like, what the hell is that? And you look it up and it is just so entirely random. Like, you just don't question it either. It's like, okay. If you say so. I just wanted to put that out there because it threw me off a fair bit with the angels. And with all this sort of coming to a conclusion now, sorry, I keep like looking around instead of the camera. All this coming to a conclusion, I'm going to give you a personal opinion that I tend to prefer all my altars in one spot. All my deity altars at least. Also, fun fact, I don't actually have technically a working altar. I have drawers where I have all my witchy shit in it, but I don't actually have a special altar. Suppose technically I should, but I still make spells. It doesn't really matter a ton to me. But yeah, for one, I don't have an actual working altar, so this is why I focus more on deity altars. And I actually prefer all my deity altars to be in sort of one spot. Now, obviously, like I mentioned earlier, it's not entirely up to you. It is the deity's altar. So they do have a say, they have the final say actually, in where it's placed. Because I'm going off angels here because they tend to be the most intense out of the entities that I work with. If I put them in a place they don't like, they'll make me know. I'll be sick or I won't be able to stop dropping shit. It's not great. So they do tend to have the final say, but I, like I said, Crononus refused to not be where all the plants were. But I do have a personal opinion that I prefer them all to be in generally one area. You may have a different opinion. Obviously, that may also change over time as I have a larger space. If I have like an apartment or something, it might change. But as of the moment, I do have the opinion that I prefer them all in one spot. I also sort of like the idea of the entities sort of interacting with each other. But yeah, that is the end of my points. I hope you liked this video. Like I said, I rarely find any sort of videos about deity altars. They're all about working altars. So I hope this video helped you because I feel like it's really hard to find stuff about deities in general on the internet. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you have a great day or night wherever you are. If you did enjoy the video, please leave a thumbs up, and if you like my videos in general, consider subscribing. If you don't, just don't be a little shit about it, please, in the comment section. Yeah. Bye guys.